We can go right ahead.
Okay, does everyone hear me? No? Louder?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Hi everyone, we are with the IPV interdivisional task force for COVID-19. This is part of the larger APA task force. So we are here today in our second roundtable. We have lots of speakers and lots of members joining us. We have Dr. Lenore Walker, who is a licensed psychologist in independent practice at Walker & Associates. She performs assessments, provides expert witness testimony and consultation in forensic cases, and she's co-chair of the IPV work group of the Interdivisional COVID-19 Task Force. We have Dr. Giselle Gaviria, who has expertise in multicultural issues for trauma survivors. She has also worked with sex trafficking survivors and battered women in different Latin cultures, both here in the US and other Latin American countries. We also have joining us Dr. Arlene Sterling from San Francisco. She's a licensed psychologist and registered dance movement therapist, and her main areas of expertise include creative arts therapy and movement therapies. And she's also co-chair of the International Whole Person Approaches working group of the Divisional COVID-19 Task Force. We also have here joining us Dr. Marilyn Safer, who is joining us from Israel. She is a professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Haifa. We also have Dr. Patricia Villavicencio, who is joining us from Spain. And she's a clinical psychologist and EMDR Europe accredited practitioner. She has also conducted research in the field of trauma and gender violence. And then we also have Brittany, who is a doctoral candidate at Westchester University, and she's also a student representative for Division 49, Society of Group Psychology.
So welcome everyone. I'm going to start. I'm also handling a little bit of the Facebook Live, as well as trying to host a couple of different things going on today. I will be sharing my screen for a little bit. I wanted to give as much information as I was able to find, but we know that it's extremely underreported in many Latin American countries. Hold on one second. But my main focus is going to be on Colombia. So IPV in Latin America during the time of COVID. What we're realizing that incidences of violence against women during the lockdown have been vastly underreported. This is continuing efforts to attempt to get an accurate number have been failing, as many other countries have also been having their own governmental things that have been also going on. So we can start off a little bit with Venezuela. I do believe sadly, Venezuela is going through many difficult things right now at this time, bordering Colombia. I do know that there is a lot of individuals who are attempting to head back into Venezuela, and there is limited resources there. Many of these individuals are working through social media, finding resources in this way, as well as sex trafficking has increased, as well as crimes against women has increased in the border, at least from between Colombia and Venezuela, from the reports that I have been reading. And Peru, I know that Sherry and some other individuals are following us from Peru. I know that they probably have much more resources for us, but calling the number 100, they also reported higher incidents of domestic violence during this time, as well as child abuse. Argentina as well. I'm just posting phone numbers. If you know anybody who's living there who may potentially, I put it in Spanish and both in Spanish and English, the phone numbers to call. So in Argentina, it would be 114. Now Colombia, where the conversation I will be having a little bit more intensely, is that the vice president, who is a female, Ramirez, by the last name of Ramirez, has actually started an initiative as of June 25th, that there is actually a special hotline because they've noticed increasing amounts of domestic violence. Granted, they saw a dip from last year, which was 8,000 incidences, about 8,000 incidents. They've seen a dip, but they've also seen it increase. There have been multiple reports of individuals videotaping incidences of neighbors, and they're really pushing towards individuals to report it. But unfortunately, there is a lot of turmoil right now. In Colombia, there was also complete shutdown. So a lot of individuals are really struggling to survive with food. And I'm going to talk about a little bit of an initiative, but these are phone numbers that we can contact in Colombia. There was an initiative called the black piece of cloth, the black piece of cloth, signifying put it out your window if you're suffering from domestic violence, so that somebody can help you. Another initiative has also been started in regards to if you're suffering with not having any food, to put a red tarp out the window. There's been an increased amount of poverty, limited movement has been allowed within each department or state, and within the cities within the state. So we're seeing that there are a lot of changes and unfortunately increased cases of domestic violence and deaths. I didn't mention Mexico, I passed by it, but generally Mexico as well, with the rate of at least 10 women dying each day, it's on the rise. And this is before COVID. We've been seeing it. So these are some of the initiatives that we have been able to see. Not all of them. I know they continue to be even more, but gradually the reports are coming out of the incidences, the fear of calling, and then the abuser returning is another issue. I really recommend for next session to join us. I know that Dr. Walker will be speaking a little bit about ways to protect ourselves within the home. And then I'll also comment a little bit on some of them. We will now, our next presenter will be speaking. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, everybody. Giselle, will you click out your slideshow? Thank you. I'm Lenore Walker. I'm a professor and psychologist, retired now from Nova Southeastern University, where I've done so much of my research in the last 20 some odd years on battered women and on battered women syndrome. We've really spent a lot of time talking about how to protect yourself. And one of the main ways is to leave the situation when you see it escalating. We cannot do that during COVID-19. Unfortunately, most of the battered women shelters are not taking new people across the world. And we know at the same time, being locked into your house with an abuser has increased domestic violence incidents at least 3 times. That's what's being reported now, triple the number of people. And before that, we knew that in at least 20% of homes, and I often said it's 1 out of 2 homes, there's going to be some form of physical, sexual, and or serious psychological abuse. So what are we going to do if we can't leave safely? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pack a bag, and we're going to put some of the important papers and some of the kinds of things you might need if you end up being hurt despite everything you do, and you have to go to the hospital or seek some other legal remedies. But for the most part, we want to try to learn how to de-escalate and not let the violence increase, the abuse increase. And the best way to do that is to recognize it when it occurs. So I thought I'll spend a few minutes just telling you about my cycle of violence that I've been doing research on. Many of you have probably seen it. It's often portrayed in a circle with a period of tension that builds, then an explosion, and then afterwards a period of loving kindness, or at least an absence of tension. I don't put it in a circle. And let me share my screen with you just to show you how I've actually conceived it. And it may be helpful because you can recognize the incidents as they start to increase and stop the escalation. So I'm going to try, to figure out now. Here we go. I think I've got it. Yes, I'm so proud of using technology, folks. So here is what I usually draw the typical cycle of violence. I do it on a graph where you have the vertical axis being the level of tension that somebody feels, or just the perception that something bad's going to happen or it's getting a little dangerous. And across the horizontal axis is time. And so we start at 0, everything's calm, and then we have a little incident. Maybe something that normally might not trigger you to do anything about it, but he comes home maybe and he's in the house and all of a sudden something bad happens. Maybe something drops and he makes a noise and distracts him. Anything could happen. And he gets a little nasty, maybe says something, a little verbal abuse, and you either ignore it or you try to let it go. And it drops and you go on, and then all of a sudden something else happens. And this can go up for a while, depending upon your individual cycle or the person's individual cycle. And that we try to plot out so that we are familiar with it. As therapists, we can help the client plot out their cycle of violence. And then it reaches a point. There may be one, it may be a major one, it may be a lot of little ones, but it reaches a point of what I call the period of inevitability. And that's when, right before the acute battering incident, the goal is to stop it down here at the low level, not when it gets up high, because the higher it gets up, the more difficult it is to stop it. This is usually when we say the only way to stop it when you get here is to leave. But if you can't leave, then we want you to back up a little bit. And afterwards, in many cases, we have a period of loving contrition. This is when he says he's sorry, or if he doesn't say it, he acts in some way that he feels better about it. And usually, as many women do, we forgive him and we go on to the next incident. Now, sometimes what happens over time, he stops saying he's sorry, and it's simply no more tension. That's also a reinforcer for staying in the relationship, because most of the time we really believe he means it. Some of the time it doesn't stay below this line. I use the graph of 0 to 10 because it's simple. And as long as all the time you use the same graph, you can plot different incidents. And that's how you build the particular cycle for the individual. You do a timeline about different incidents and try to give them a rating of 0 up to 10 is death. And we don't want to even look there. But 8, I use as the lethal danger zone. This is when the violence is so bad. He picks up a gun, he has another weapon, he chokes her, or we call it strangulation now. Any of those kinds of serious life-threatening behaviors. And the tension will go up, and it's right here. We don't want to get it there. We want to try to get it down lower. We try to use conflict resolution skills. We'll go over some of those kinds of tips later on that we can use to try to calm things down. But most battered women know how to do it. It's just a question of whether they're going to use it or not. And we're suggesting now during COVID, use your conflict resolution skills for the time being. And then afterwards, again, The tension goes down, it feels better, and there's a period of the loving contrition that I sort of draw under the line. And in really dangerous situations, you can see the violence does not go down. It's up and down a little bit, but never below the lethal danger zone. Those are the times you have to go. No matter what time, whether it's COVID-19 or quarantine, you still can call the police, you still can call the shelter numbers, or you have to take that packed bag that we talked about before and leave and find a way to get yourself some security. So if you can use this as a kind of guide for many of the people that you're working with or for yourselves, it will give you a good idea of how to stay as safe as possible during a time when services are not as readily available as they used to be. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. I think the next person is going to be Dr. Eileen Serlin, who's going to talk a little bit about what's happening around the world where she's working.
I'm waiting till we get back to, there we go. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending upon your time zones. I'm speaking to you in California. It's about 9 in the morning. I'm Dr. Eileen Serlin. I'm a psychologist. I'm also a dance movement therapist. And I've discovered in many years of work that some truths that are now being said now by Bessel van der Kolk and others, that trauma is in the body. So I'm really going to talk about some nonverbal work that I've done with trauma, which I think transcends culture and is applicable for all of us. It actually started years ago when I was working in Israel with some young girls. These were very religious girls who were dressed to keep people away. And we looked at ways of carrying themselves in the body, that it wasn't depending upon clothes, but it clearly said, I have respect for myself, I have respect for my body, I'm going to control who does what to me. So it was really about attitude in the body. When I started to work in China when the COVID started and it was locked down, as you know, many of you know, the spaces, the home spaces are very small. And the use of space really accentuates violence. It wasn't just lockdown, but it was whole families in very small spaces, which tends to increase the emotion and the violence. So what can you do if you are in a very small space and the anger is escalating? I'm going to demonstrate something, and maybe if you find it simple enough, you can do it yourselves and demonstrate to others. And really the key words here are strength, building resilience, boundaries, ability to say no, mostly non-verbally. So strength, I actually won't stand, but it really is literally your feet on the ground. And we would almost always in all trauma work just start with feeling your strength on the ground. Dr. Walker talked about escalating violence, and many of us are not even aware of our own body sensations, know when the escalation is starting. Tuning into the body is a great source of information about what's happening in the room and what we can do about it. Some of these measures I learned in Aikido and martial arts. They're very common. It's really how to stay as calm, as strong, as centered in the face of aggression so that you don't lose control and make it worse. We always start with feet on the ground and strength, and this is something we should be doing regularly and teaching ourselves and everyone we work with. Feet on the ground and strength. The same thing about centered and balance. We actually work with just, let's say you can go right and left until you find your balance again. Strong, balanced, and centered. Now in China, there were a lot of people were in one room. You couldn't escape to another room. So we work with safe space, just how to sort of begin to feel your own bubble, kinesphere. We all live in a certain amount of personal space. Some people like a larger amount of interactive space. Some people prefer closer space. How to regulate your space and who comes into it. You feel people who sort of project, don't come closer, or yes. I mean, we actually work with yes and no, inviting and pushing away. And once you get that feeling, so whoever wants to try it with me, just actually, this is come in, go away, come in. And when you go away, you actually breathe and fill the space with your own self. We work with, this is shrinking. It's called shrinking, which means basically I make myself as small as possible versus taking up your space. Again, think martial arts. So shrinking, taking away your space, and now actually just boundaries you literally can feel. And we'd have people explore, where are my boundaries? Where is the yes, 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 no? Yes, 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 no. So let's just try that. Feel kind of the space you're living in. Fill it with your breath and your sense of stop, stop. It's very hard for women actually to say no or stop with authority and strength. Once you feel it in your body, it comes through in your voice, it comes through with authority and strength. Women are often made fun of for sort of saying, no, 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 go away, in a very ineffective way. So we learn in martial arts and movement to do it with effectiveness. Stop, no. That's basically all I'm going to say now. It's very simple, it's very universal, and it's communicated in the body non-verbally. We can feel it ourselves, we can teach others to do it, and it can be very powerful. There is I forgot to put a link on it, maybe I'll add one, a link that we did in China, which is also translated in Chinese. So if anybody is interested in that, there's a script in Chinese on it. But it's true for all of us all around the world. No. Thank you. Yes. Next.
Patricia or
Patricia is next from Spain.
Yes.
Unmute yourself.
Now. Hi, this is Patricia Villavicencio. I am originally from Peru, but I live in Madrid, in Spain, for more than half of my life. I'm a clinical psychologist and also an associate professor at the Universidad Complutense of Madrid. I work in a public hospital. Spain has a public health system very strong. Well, we criticize it, but comparing it to other parts of the world, it's quite strong comparing, for example, with Peru. And I belong to today I will be speaking about the task force against violence in our hospitals. In Spain, we have 17 communities, like states, we call them, comunidades autónomas. And each community has, each state has its own health management services. And fortunately, since 2004, Spain, we have gender violence law that helped to encourage initiatives. And me, at my age, I'm very glad to have seen how this has developed. Early in the 90s or late in the 80s, feminist movement, women were fighting for, we had already better women shelters as other parts of the world, but we didn't have like the consciousness that like other parts also, that violence is a health issue, also a human rights issue. That's amazing that only back in 1994, many countries in the world signed up that paper that said that violence against women was a human rights violation. And that was back only in 1994. The young people might think this is like, oh my God. And me, myself, I was not aware that I had no rights when I was a kid or a young woman. Just to go straight to the point, in 2006, thanks to this law, we had an amazing thing happening in our health system, that the director, I will say, the Ministry of Health of Madrid sent a note, a letter, internal note, forcing, inviting, but it was forcing hospitals to start task forces against violence in each hospital. And my hospital, it's one of the most, it was built back in the 1800s, and we're a very active task force. We have different professionals of different departments. We give lots of training, and we have in our intranet, if I can share my presentation, let me see if I could share my, what it is here. I don't know if you can see it. Let me check. Okay, can you see it? Yes, right? Okay, this is the letter, which is like, oh my God, I don't know where it is, but I should frame it. And we have this, we'll go quick, what's the objectives and our goals. And that was back in 2006. I'm a member since then. I feel very fortunate. I have very good friends that might be watching. And we have developed and designed and written 3 protocols for procedures for all professionals in our hospital and outpatient clinics that belong to the hospital, one for children, one for the elderly and women. Inside of each one of these manuals or procedures, we have a theory, and especially what to do in case you have a patient with suspicion of being abused. And lately, we have developed a guideline for chemical submission. And I think we are the first hospital that did this. And now most hospitals in Madrid are starting to do it. And here are all the members: social workers, nurses, midwives, clinical psychologists, doctors in emergency rooms, surgery, traumatology, pediatricians, gynecology, geriatrics, psychiatrists, internal medicine, legal medicine. We're a huge number of professionals and very actively and passionately involved. And our mission, like other task forces, raise awareness, and especially we have we register all the cases that come to our office. Being a professional working in a public hospital and being also a specialist in trauma is very hard in a public system, which is you have a patient one after the other coming, and I have a 7-month waiting list for in my case, imagine other specialists. But we have this register. We register the cases. We try to give training every year to most of the departments at the hospital services. I will show you. And before showing you what we do is lately what we have done for COVID, and I will not show you the video that we have. Most of our members have been involved is in making sure that during COVID times, we know that the most vulnerable there are women, the elderly, and immigrant women. For example, we focus also on female genital mutilation. We have a procedure also that I forgot to mention. And you can look at the video in our Facebook page that Dr. Gaviria will be downloading it. And I make sure that I translate it into English it's all in Spanish, but if you check in the description, I translated it and adapted it into English. It's very hard to speak another language and try to make sure that you'll understand, but it was a pleasure. And we have posters all over the hospital also with diagrams, what to do when you suspect you have a possible victim, or you have a victim of abuse in your office or in your department. And there are telephone numbers, and we have a case manager in the hospital, which is the social worker. So if you find it happens to be a patient in your office and you register, and you put the number, we call it history, your history intake. When you have a number as a patient, you write down the number, and the case manager makes sure to get in contact with the women and look with her. You send the woman to the case manager, and she makes sure that she gets all the resources available in our community, like shelters, legal aid, etc. First of all, we take care of their health, of course, if they have injuries. And if they are impacted by, of course, by psychological violence, and they have the chance to be in my agenda, that we have a special trauma unit where I give support to especially not to battered women, gender violence, like interpersonal violence, because in Spain, since 2006, we have lots of resources in our community. In this special unit, we give support, special treatment for sexual violence and sexual abuse victims in childhood sexual abuse, and they are all women over 18, from 18 up and up. Okay, there's one thing that we did a long time ago. Is talking about what's violence and resources they have in our community. Let me check. And this is our, how you call this? We call it triptycho, and how you call it in English? I forgot the word of the document. You fold it into three, and we call it triptycho. And it's for women victims of sexual violence. And here I want to stop just a second, because in the community of Madrid, this is the register, how we register our cases. But regarding sexual violence, we are having a huge new thing in Madrid. Until now, women victims of sexual violence coming to hospitals, they were referred to only one hospital that had the protocol. That hospital is Hospital La Paz. And we have fought a lot because it was better for the legal system to assist them, and medical forensics also. But since this year, we're going to give training to all our staff in each hospital has the duty to train their own staff on how to intervene with sexual violence victims. So this is one huge thing that is happening now in Madrid. And what else? Well, that's the number of cases that we had in mental health. And we have a special protocol for female genital mutilation. And well, and I think I finish my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention, and hope you have learned something more about Spain and the work we do.
Thank you. Now we're going to be hearing from Dr. Lawrence Jerston, founder of the Peace Center.
Hi, everybody. I'm Larry Gerstein. I'm going to try to share my screen with you. See my PowerPoint, I think. Okay, I'm the director of the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies at Ball State University. I'm also a professor of psychology. Domestic violence is not my expertise, and I've learned a lot from this particular group about domestic violence. And what I'm going to share with you today, I think some of it might be relevant to the issue of domestic violence. Some of it might not. I think where it is critical is in potentially preventing a relationship that's teetering on being significantly violent to maybe prevent it from continuing to escalate. So, and I hope that in the conversation that we have after I finish, there'll be some contextualizing of what I present. So, a number of these things are, are not new to you if you've been trained in psychology, but how they might be used and how you teach them to other people, that might be something unique. So one skill that I think is important in conflict prevention and resolution is finding common ground. And sometimes I know from years ago when I did do clinical work, sometimes when working with couples that were really in a very dysfunctional relationship, the best you could do with common ground is to identify for both of them that, wow, you're so angry at each other, you know, you're just so passionate about your issues, and that was all you could do. But I think in lots of cases, if you can figure out, and if you're working with both parties, say for instance in an abusive relationship, you could try to bring them back to what was their common ground that brought them together, particularly the positive parts of the relationship that they enjoyed about each other, and developing that common ground and supporting it, reinforcing it, could potentially help to rebuild the rapport in a way that they can, have a more healthy dialogue with each other. Another important aspect of conflict prevention and resolution is empathy. And when I do this presentation in public or with other groups, I ask them, like, what does this have to do with conflict prevention and resolution? And what the heck do these pictures have to do with anything that I might be talking about? And, if you're good with images, you could see that in the image on the left, the young Mongolian child is mirroring the camel, in their nonverbal behavior. And the image on the right at the bottom, the person's walking in two different shoes. And I mean, in all of our psych classes, we hear that empathy is walking in somebody's shoes. So again, to help people to have empathy with each other is so critical to resolving conflicts. So when I present this in public, I ask, how many of you think this is active listening? And, people raise their hand, sure. And I say, you're partially right. And it's interesting that Dr. Serlin talked about China, because I love to use this Chinese word. I don't know if you all know this Chinese word, but it's the Chinese word for listening. And the Chinese words are made up of characters, and they're really kind of ingenious. And so the Chinese word for listening is listening with your ears, listening, looking with your eyes, seeing, using your mind, using your heart, and your undivided attention. Wow, it's totally challenging, right? But in difficult conversations where you're trying to help people to better understand one another, they've got to listen. And I remember back in the 1970s how the behaviorists were pushing in couples and family therapy that we need to teach people how to listen to each other before we can even jump into any of the dynamics that are going on. And I think there's still truth. There's still a lot of truth in that. Of course, part of listening is paraphrasing, which you all know, parroting minimal encouragers. That helps people to, to demonstrate that they're paying attention, and the effective pause or the silence, which psychoanalysts, psychodynamic people are wonderful with. Other people are not. CBT people tend not to use pauses a lot, but pauses do help if they're used appropriately. Two other things, and I go back again to, it's interesting, to Dr. Serlin's comments, and I have found over the years in doing mediation in difficult situations, difficult mediations, that if I can help the people to lower their voice and speak more gently and softer and calmer, especially if they're faced with somebody who is raising their voice, then a situation can de-escalate. And I'm sure you've all had experiences with this. I think unless you've had a lot of practice with your voice and how you use it, our instinctual response when someone starts raising their voice is to raise our voice. And they go loud, we go louder. And I remember many years ago in a Gestalt workshop that I participated in, there was, we enacted, using our voice to both communicate emotion and also to control our emotion. And most of us don't pay much attention to that part of our experience, and we don't have a lot of mindfulness around how our voice projects what we're thinking, what we're feeling. So, and then what I have found is that in mediation, we assume a lot, particularly in relationships that we've been in a long time. We finish people's sentences. We think we know what they're thinking. Oftentimes in an intimate relationship, it's the worst thing that the person's thinking that you're thinking when it might not be true. And so if there's space there to fully understand each other and get the perspectives out without the judgment, then you'd be surprised how a situation can de-escalate. And I think that's all my slides. And I'll stop sharing my screen. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we are opening the floor for questions. Do you have any questions? Feel free to use that chat box.
Or on Facebook as well. Any questions in regards with the co-hosts? Any questions between the co-hosts as well?
I find it's so interesting how we are merging two different groups, people who have a lot of the skills in conflict resolution that we would not use when we're dealing with domestic violence survivors. We have spent a lot of time on getting help rather than on conflict resolution, mostly because conflict resolution, the protocol is not to see people in couples treatment. We see them individually. We put men in male treatment groups. We put women in groups in learning how to stand up for themselves and take care of themselves. A lot of what Eileen was talking about in physical, paying attention physically, which I never thought about, but is so important when you think about being forced to be in the same space, is to how to communicate everything. I thought about the little kids who used to tell me what their angry parents' face looked like when they were yelling at them, and how they would describe the spit coming out of their mouth or the vein in their forehead popping, and how if maybe we held up a mirror to each other, or maybe Zoom calls, I don't know, might be something that we have to think about adding to our domestic violence protocols that we've been using. So it's just part of what I've been thinking. I think we should just unmute ourselves and jump in because we don't have a lot of time left. And
I actually did that. And it's a whole, we've talked about, Dr. Walker, thank you. Zoom is a whole new territory for so many of us, providers of, and I recorded actually a session. It was a couple speaking very unaware of their voices, their body language, what they were doing. And on Zoom, you can record. And I've just started doing, I sent them the recording and asked them to watch it.
That's so clever. And Larry talking about the need to lower your voice because it's so natural to just want to raise it.
So we have a question in the chat box.
Oh, great.
They ask, how have you helped domestic violence survivors during COVID using specific ways, since shelters are not allowing and the access is only through phone?
Well, we're trying.
Okay, go ahead, Lenore.
I'll start, and then Dawn, maybe you want to talk too. We are starting to help people try not to have to use the shelter, but if they have to use it, then we tell them to call the police, and they will make arrangements. If the shelters here in Fort Lauderdale area and Miami area, actually, if they don't have bed space, they do have other places where they will have people house them. So we do have that for the very serious cases. But given we never had enough room in shelters anyhow for all the people who needed them, that's why we're trying to find ways to not, to reduce the escalation of conflict where we can. But don't hesitate to use it if you need it. Dawn, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I would also add that sometimes we also need to leave temporarily, and that may be a way as a stopgap measure to sort of allow for the de-escalation process to occur. And these are really sort of simple strategies. I need to go to the bathroom, or I'm going to take a shower now. I'm going to take the dog out. Let me throw the garbage out. Oh, let me go get an iced coffee, right? Things that are not engaging in that struggle because that may be too threatening and that may be too dangerous for you. But by you leaving in one of these sort of ruses to just get out of the situation, even in, in COVID, may give you a temporary respite and also give him a chance to de-escalate. So kind of allowing yourself to have these little strategies, to work within that moment. And sometimes it's also with the psychological abuse. That is really damaging. And all of us, obviously, on this panel know that the emotional kind of degrading and offensive comments just wear on you. And sometimes you need a break and you just need to sort of give yourself some type of respite for yourself so you don't escalate, which then puts you in greater danger. The second thing that I want to say to Dr. Slynn about the movement, certainly that may not be accessible to someone who, if their partner is violent. But what I have done with my clients in empowering ways is do that internally. We have our own strategies. One client puts the tongue on the roof of her mouth, which is her protective bubble, right? She does, her movement and her, ways of Aikido internally. That's empowering her to kind of get through the situation that she's in that moment. So, I think we're really all trying to think creatively. And most of us have done this when, our clients have not been ready to leave, right? This is a process. It's, not always ready and available, but how do they keep themselves, I say, psychologically safe, right? And also physically safe.
Great idea.
I'd like to suggest an attempt to combine conflict resolution during the periods that you've mentioned, Lenore, are quiet times and relaxation times, rather just to let those relaxation and quiet times go, to encourage the people to bring up and talk about ways of dealing with the situation, actually maybe making a map of the area where you can go off to for quiet times, to be a bit more proactive than having this continually going back and forth. I have been using conflict resolution techniques with couples, training them to use some of the techniques that Larry mentioned.
And also safety planning, having a list of activities that you can do, because in the flustering moment of not knowing, at least having it on your phone or written down, what can I do right now to either reduce the tension that I'm going through, somewhere where they feel safe enough to keep it, or either on their phone or written or somewhere, or at least some kind of cue that tells you, hey, I can do this, I can do this. If it's the leash for the dog, you know, having like cues set up around the room that you can alternate or deviate the attention to, like, oh, I have to walk the dog, or get the iced coffee as well. Because that's, I've been working a lot with safety planning, where at least if something escalates, what can you do? And Larry, really great information.
It's interesting to me that you all are talking about these cases where I would say the violence has escalated to a point where it's physical and it's highly dangerous. I wonder, in the continuum, you know, as you work with people, if there are places in the continuum where conflict prevention and resolution strategies would be more appropriate. That's one question for you. So you have somebody that comes in and is talking about being, you know, emotionally abused, but it hasn't escalated yet to, you know, intense psychological abuse or physical abuse. And then the second question I had for you is, what about if they have kids, right? And say you're the person who has experienced the physical abuse, and then you have kids that have observed it. Is there a place for conflict prevention and resolution in your dialogue with your children about the situation?
So we are really short on time, but I definitely.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, I want to definitely hear. You had your hand raised.
I did.
Yes.
So,
Go ahead.
just quickly, I haven't heard anybody address education here, but I used to work, just speaking of that, and I know we're talking about kind of the outcome, but you're talking about, Larry, you're talking about the continuum, you know, and I remember I used to work in a psychiatric hospital with conduct disorder, hyperactive, acting out boys, pretty serious. These were hospitalized young people, adolescents. And a lot of these young kids were not, we're talking about, you know, awareness of internal cues. They would not be aware of the tension mounting until there was an explosion. Mm-hmm. So we taught them about modulating emotions early on. Sometimes it was like a drum, started softer, louder, softer, louder, softer, and the voice practice so that hopefully people become more able to control and modulate emotions by the time they get to these older stages. And teaching it to young people was really important because we don't learn this anywhere.
These are great discussions. Unfortunately, we are out of time today. But next week, we're going to continue the discussions. We're also going to look at safety and finding more safe spaces in the house and safe ways to keep in the house. So tune in, everybody. For next week, we'll have hopefully the same speakers and more. And if you still have questions, we'll keep looking at the chat room and online on Facebook page. So they'll keep this up all week. We'll keep looking all week. See you next week. Stay safe.
Yes.
Be safe. Be
Bye,
safe.
everybody.
Safe, everyone. If you have any additional
Bye-bye.
questions or if your comments were not been able, you can message us privately on Facebook or on Instagram so we can answer your questions. I thank you all for participating and I can't wait to see you next week. Take care.
Thank you for
Bye.